Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us in the second session of this 12th edition of Sansad Ratna Awards. I'm sure you had a great time in the first half of the event, seeing the best performing parliamentarians and the rest of the most sizzling thoughts from the Chief Election Commissioner, from the Honorable Minister, and legendary politician Veerappa Moily sir. So now in the second session, we are having two panel discussions. The first panel discussion will be on women empowerment, the role of women empowerment for a progressive society. And I'm so glad that today we have Ms. Gloria Barbena with us. Ms. Gloria Barbena is the Minister Council of Public Affairs at the US Embassy in New Delhi. She is a career diplomat and arrived in India in 2021. In her role, she oversees the immense efforts of public diplomacy across the country and across a range of subjects including economic empowerment, climate, Indo-Pacific, and health. So we would surely know much about Ms. Gloria in this conversation. Thank you, Ms. Gloria, for being with us today. And we also have Mr. J. Rajiv Chaudhary, who is an educationalist, a moderator, a panelist, an actor, a director, a creative producer, and the link goes on. So we're so glad to hear women perspective of women empowerment from a male point of view, because that's more important. It's very easy for a woman to stand up and say women empowerment is important, but it's equally important for us to get the support from the counterpart to get this going. So thank you so much, Mr. J. Rajiv Chaudhary. So he is joining us on behalf of DAV Group of Schools, Chennai. And so he will take us through the education perspective of how women empowerment is, how progressive society needs women empowerment on. And we now have Srinivasa Prabhu, who's a joint secretary retired from the Lok Sabha Secretariat. And he had 35 years of experience working in the well of the parliament. So he had seen 6 prime ministers take in vote and step down from the office. So he had been a pinnacle of strength to much of the private members' bill which had actually come on board. And so he will give us the government perspective of how women empowerment is important in ensuring that we lead to a progressive society. So with no further delay, so may I request our honorable speakers to please come on the dais. Panelists to being with us today. And there has always been a continuous support for women empowerment, at least post-independence. And we have been evolving through. So how do you see women empowerment earlier to what we are now, say, taking a span of about 50 years? And if you can also give us an experience of yours in the global arena, how women empowerment is being taken. So can we hear it from Ms. Gloria, please?
Hello? Okay, this works. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this incredible opportunity to participate with this illustrious panel and to support this really valuable award process that recognizes such important work. And I just want to give a huge shout out to the students who gave such a wonderful musical performance. They were fabulous, absolutely fabulous. You left me wanting more, so I'm a little bit jealous of the morning, who I understand had an actual performance that lasted a full half hour. We got 5 minutes, I want more. But really, you were absolutely wonderful. But thank you again for inviting me to be part of this panel and to talk a little bit about such an important topic, women's empowerment. Because obviously, unless women are fully participative, unless gender equality is real and practiced, and recognized across the globe, we're not realizing our potential as individual states in terms of our global potential. It's the right thing to do, obviously, but it's also a strategic imperative. From any government perspective, from any state perspective, I think it's sort of self-evident, but it bears repeating that when women are at the table, when they are fully empowered, when they are economically empowered, when they are part of the decision-making process, our world is safer, more secure, our world is more economically prosperous, our children have better futures. And frankly, I'm a little bit biased because I'm a woman, but I've also just seen it in practice. The decision-making process is different. The conversation is different. When women are economically empowered, they invest differently. They're thinking about healthcare. They're thinking about education. The sensibility, the appreciation for what's going on in our environment, environmental sustainability. Women generally come at it from a different, perhaps more holistic perspective. You know, they're thinking about their children's futures. They're thinking about the impact on their families. They're thinking about the prices that they're paying at the grocery store or at the supermarket or in the public market, and how are they going to stretch that budget to feed their family. Likewise, when we're looking at just workplace empowerment, you raised sort of the question of what have we seen over the last 15 years, and huge strides, huge changes. Even, I think of my own personal experience. I've been in the State Department for over 30 years now, a little bit long in the tooth, but a long time. And even within the State Department, within the U.S. government, certainly have seen huge strides. When I first joined, there certainly were women in the State Department, and I just use this as an example, but you'd walk into any room, and the people around the table, the decision makers, were all men. Over time, we saw a change in that, and I'm sad to mark the recent passing of Madeleine Albright, but when she became Secretary of State, the first woman Secretary of State, that was a huge marker for us. There's something about having a role model. There is something about having women who are willing to be positive mentors and who will bring up that next generation. And I have to absolutely give a nod to your comment about how important the men have been. The men who have recognized that the role and the place of women, the gender inclusivity is absolutely essential if we're to recognize our potential. And it was on all of you to create that space and to mentor. And certainly from my own personal experience, I have benefited enormously from innumerable men in very senior positions who saw something, who wanted to support my success, but even more broadly and more importantly, a more inclusive workplace, and so created that opening and not only the model, but also the channels for success. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, and you all will be specifically addressing it, but those avenues so that women and girls can be successful. It's not just about, we can, of course, anybody can be voted into Parliament or anybody can be voted into Congress, but it's how do we get women from point A to point B? How do we help them be successful candidates? How do we help them raise the funds and run the campaigns, just as an example? But that applies to every sector of endeavor, whether you're a medical doctor, whether you're an educator, whether a politician. There are all channels for success, and how do we help women succeed in that? And how do we help girls open their mentality so that they even consider those possibilities? We've done a lot of investment and a lot of conversation about STEM support. So, science, technology, economics, mathematics, I think it is. Also the arts, sometimes it's STEAM, recognizing that, hey, that creative element, those artistic elements is so important. But the emphasis being, at a certain point, girls self-select out from the science areas. Why is that? And helping them to understand and helping to provide those channels of support. So a heck of a lot to talk about today. I've thrown out a lot of different seeds and threads, but I'm just delighted to join the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gloria. That was so candid, but you really ran us through the points which actually had to be taken into account. Thank you so much for that. Srinivasa Prabhu, sir, if you can just, because you have had the experience being in the parliament for almost more than 30 years.
Yes.
And how important is women empowerment seen in public policy?
Yes. In fact, for many centuries, as we all know, that women were suppressed. They did not have any access to education. They did not have any, even for basic health facilities. They did not have access to any professional this thing. But when the constitution was drafted, it was felt that women should have a special preference. In fact, we have a special article for women. The government, there's a constitution, article 15 in the Constitution of India, which says that the government can make special provision for women. And under this article, the government has made many special provisions. In fact, we all know there's a separate ministry for women welfare, Ministry of Women Welfare. And special allocation of funds is made every year. And these funds are used for education, health, prenatal and postnatal for mothers. All this, the government spends all this for this welfare of women. And even some legislations have been made for the welfare of women. And you know that some of the legislations are totally biased in favor, you can say that they have been made in favor of women also. Such that no person can think of harassing or humiliating any woman. You can say that some legislations are been drafted in such a way, but those are really required for the development. But for the economic development, I can say that way back, about 20 years back, the special help groups were formed in our country. This to help women who are not educated, to train them in whatever arts or professions they can manage, and help them to earn some money and financially independent. Even some banks also give special incentives for the women. Now, any program of the government will always have inclusion of women. And regarding the parliament, I can say that based on the need for the women empowerment, a standing committee on women empowerment was set up. Now, all policy decisions are discussed by members of parliament. There are 31 members, and Dr. Hina Gavit, who was awarded this morning, she is a chairman of that committee, and I believe that she was supposed to participate in this, but she had to rush suddenly. She is a chairman. All policies relating to women are discussed thoroughly in the committee and recommended to the government. And I know that many of the recommendations are accepted by the government. Government takes into consideration the recommendations of the committee. Definitely, the government and the parliament are conscious about the women welfare, not only economic, educational empowerment, but they are even conscious of the political rights. And there have been demands for the reservation for women in Lok Sabha and state legislatures. But right now we don't have the reservation, but the local bodies are the base route for the democracy of the country. We have reservation in local bodies. There is a first step for democratic setup organization. We have in almost many states, I can say that 50% of the seats are reserved for women in local bodies. When any decision is made or any decision is taken, they will take into account of the need and other welfare measures of the women.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Actually, that's true because for the past 75 years from where we have started post-independence, there has been a lot of protection and there has been a lot of concern which has been raised over the women, and the government has also taken, precautions and policies in the matter to ensure that women are protected and they are empowered as well.
Definitely.
So thank you for that insights. And now I'm going to Mr. Chowdhury. So I would want to hear from you, is it important for a society to be progressive only when the women are empowered? Does women empowerment have to do anything with a progressive society?
Yeah, that's an interesting ask, Priya, thank you. So I believe that yeah, it's absolutely essential to have what I call world balance. And I think Gloria mentioned some of that, and she sort of gave a lovely overview of life at large and most avenues, leading towards the same. I think it's, take it into a small sort of an example of, say, a boardroom or a team meeting where you have an equal number of men and women brainstorming a solution. You will find a better solution evolve when you have, both energies involved. I believe there are different energies, and the best comes forth when you have a perspective both from men and women. So the simple answer to your question is that absolutely necessary to have, women playing equally important roles. See, I come from a sector which is education, and I'm happy to say that given the fact that school education requires young children to be taken care of, so the natural tendency is towards, women teachers, and we have a much larger strength of women than men as teachers. So I come from a sector where I think perhaps the men need some empowering, but the women really play a significant role, very important role there. So let's take that one step further and say, what about the principles? What about leadership roles, right? And that's where I think it's become more important, and we are doing that currently. While, our principals, we run 10 schools, so 8 are women, women principals, and only 2 male principals. And I'm happy to state this, I'm not complaining. In our leadership, which is, say, the head office that really controls, runs, makes policies, critical decisions and strategy towards how to run things, we have an equal number today, which wasn't the case earlier, of men and women driving, the leadership roles of head of publishing, head of academics, head of sports, head of policy, and so on. So I'm really happy to say that this is something that is happening, not just with us, but I generally sense it happening across. But I think we need to speed that up because the world needs this balance. And the more we work towards, this equally empowered, male and female energies coming into play, you will find great things happening for the nation and the world at large, right? I'd like to add a little thing which I personally, an example of what I personally experienced. I was running a workshop for women from a very leading bank, and the topic was about women's empowerment in the 21st century kind of thing. The strange thing that evolved out of that, and they had a male trainer, right? So that was interesting. I was the only male in the room, and the good thing that came about was that they said, we don't take up a senior position that, say, 2 levels up, there's a skip level, and you seem like you are ready in terms of qualifications, in terms of experience. You don't take it up because you are ridden with a certain guilt. What will happen to my children and my family? So I think this is to all the women in the audience here. You need to empower yourself from within first. You need to get past those hurdles that we tend to imagine, or perhaps society puts those demands on us. And I think we need to filter those, and we need to see it from a lens that's fine, just as my spouse or every male member in my family goes about having a career and manages a certain amount of sporting or social activity, and also, right, gives out time for the family, and I will do the same. And that is good enough. So many of them, I found 80% of them, and I had a crowd of, say, 30, if you were to take that as a sample, 80% said that, no, we don't take that position because of guilt. And very soon we find that the people we trained have actually taken those leadership roles. And so therefore there is a certain disappointment, there's a certain frustration that comes in, and I stay pretty much where I am for a pretty long period of time, which is totally unnecessary. So my call out really is, if you want that balance, I mean, the world needs it. There's no two ways about it. Everybody's talking about it, and there's been a huge effort. Srinivasaji just said, about how even the government is, going about creating the right avenues, the right opportunities, the right legislation, using all of that to ensure that women are empowered. I believe that women need to empower themselves from within first. So that's my little message with which I'll end.
Absolutely point, Bot. In fact, that's most important. I think we are not in that age right now where we look out for people to give us empowerment. I think it's more that we have to understand that we have that empowerment ourselves. So it's like taking space for your own self rather than looking at the atmosphere and the society to give you the space to go and grow. And taking a lead from there. Gloria, if you check for the past 100 years, the term women empowerment has really had evolved. So what we look at women empowerment in about 100 years before is not equal to what we look at it right now. So today we look at it in the perspective of gender equality, equal opportunity, or acceptability, rather than how we looked at it previously. So at this point in time, so if I really have to say, if a woman has to be empowered, so what do you think that woman has to do? Like, what are the challenges which will come her way, and what is it she has to go through?
That's okay. That's a really interesting question, because I also think it depends on where you sit. All of us here are in very privileged positions, and we have had the advantage of tremendous education. We can vote. We're probably fairly economically independent, or have independent resources that we can draw from. If we have children, we have childcare, probably, or extended families that can help with that. We may have health insurance. We may have a job, and we do have a job that we can depend on. So for those of us who are privileged, and it is huge privilege, we're in a very different place, and I think it is perhaps about our mindset about taking advantage of the opportunities that are open to us, and moving ourselves forward, and not having this sense of being an imposter. There's a lot of literature written about this imposter syndrome, and women who are successful often feeling like, boy, am I really qualified to be here? Should I be here? When, of course, they're as well educated and have the experience as any of their male counterparts might have. But I would also kind of turn that around and just challenge the audience to think a little bit about other strata who aren't anywhere near where we're at, economically speaking, or being able to fully participate. And I think coming out of COVID, and I'll just throw this out to the group, when we're in this recovery period, it's really a moment to pause and look at the impact of COVID on different strata. And I think women have been disproportionately affected by the impact of COVID. They've often been the caregivers of the elderly and the children, and have had to stay home and just deal with that, because that was either the expectation or there was no one else to do it. As a result, I think they often dropped out of the workplace, and depending on whether they had formal or informal jobs, they dropped out, and a lot of those jobs have disappeared or are coming back in different ways. And so the question of, are those women going to be able to get back into the workforce easily? That's a question. Are those jobs there, and can they get back in? And then there's and I'll just throw this out there as well, there is the scourge of domestic violence. And we have really seen an uptick during COVID. And again, because women, were often at home with their abusers, and all of the resources that would normally have been available to those women, the support systems, the first responders, the counseling, all of that, dried up or was not available, or they were not able to reach out. They weren't able to go to school or go to the workplace and access those communities. And so the impact of domestic violence on a woman's mentality, on a woman's ability to move herself out of a difficult situation, that's huge. And so when we talk about it's kind of up to women to self-empower, I couldn't agree more, but it's a very complicated picture, and depending on where that woman is sitting, I think it becomes even more complicated. And so as we look at what we need to be doing at a city level, at a state level, at a national level, at a multilateral level, we really do need to be appreciating those differences, and it just makes for a very complex picture. But I couldn't agree more that the avenues that are available to women now are so much more than they were 100 years ago. Where I'm sitting, I don't have to worry about voting. I got the vote. I have access to education. I have health care. So those kinds of things for many women that create a completely different environment than they did 10 years or 100 years ago.
Absolutely right. In fact, we had days where minimum education, medication, and equality was a luxury, and today we're taking it as a right. And I think that's a big step. As a women community, we have come up all the way. Prabhu sir, I just wanted to ask you, now that you told me that the public policy shows a lot of inclination for women empowerment and women's security, where was the need that the government came up with this skill development, giving more of importance to women there as well, also giving more scope for women in the MSME? So is it a step taken by the government consciously to ensure that, as Gloria rightly said, that there are no much of dropouts after you ensure to grow your family, of having children or getting married? So is it a conscious step taken by the ministry to create, by the government to create a ministry on skill development and giving much of scope for women in MSME?
See, definitely the government is doing it all its best to economically, financially, and educationally improve the welfare of the women. Your question is that government is why?
No, I was asking you that now that we have an exclusive skill development ministry.
Skill development, yes.
Yes, and where there is a huge scope for women to participate in the skill development ministry. There are a lot of policies where the skill development ministry does exclusively for women. Secondly, even in MSME, there is exclusive policies which are for the women.
Yes.
So, because you were talking about the policy matters prior to this, so is it a conscious decision by the government to make such availability for women so that there are opportunities for women, even they get to do after they, decide to grow their family? Probably they don't drop out from regular family, regular jobs, because they're more self-reliable. This self-help groups makes them more self-sustainable, make them economically independent. So is that a conscious decision which the government has taken, is what I'm asking you?
No, it's not like that. See, the skill development is recently started, about 4 or 5 years back. The government set up a special department for skill development, where training is given to all to enable them to get trained in many fields. Like what happened is, we have electricians, we have plumbers, we have carpenters, but they're not all trained. They just learned the trade of tricks from their fathers, forefathers. But now we have a special skill development where they can get training and they will get a certificate, and once they get it, they get a job.
Yeah, that's for the male counterpart.
Yes, even for women, that's what I'm coming to it. Even for women, they can also have this opportunity. I can see that many women, especially, they get training in tailoring, cosmetics, makeup. They prefer this job. They are being trained. yes, in tailoring, garments, and they do take a job. Once they get that training, they definitely, they can get some employment in good companies, and they can be independent, financially independent. Government is doing definitely for this.
Yes, so thank you for that thought. And Mr. Chowdhury, because you're from the education background, I'm forced to ask you this question, which I've been having for years together. All through my life, the first rank and the second rank have always been in the class girls. And as you grow the ladder, you know, the percentage recedes, and once you reach the top management in your, whichever company you are, it's hardly a chance to reach out there. So my point is, when they had been an outstanding students in education, and they have been able to compete with their counterparts in school and colleges, why doesn't it happen in that workspace?
Absolutely. I may not have an answer for you, but I agree. I would raise the same question. And I think it's a very important question for all of us to think and ponder. And I may not have a ready answer for that, but you're absolutely right in the comparison that you make, that, you know, the girl student does extremely well, is more conscientious at times, especially in the early years, is more, better scorer in terms of percentages. So where does that matrix switch? But it does, right? So I think there's a lot to do with, if you look at India, I think it's a lot to do with social structure, familial structures. It's also to do with the fact that there is a conditioning that happens for the girl child in the home, which is less now, with nuclear families and all of that. But in the old system, in the joint family, if you track back 75 years, it was clearly understood that the girls would not end up in a career, right? And hence, if there was a limited resource available in terms of capital in the house, that would go towards educating the male child. Totally wrong. I'm not saying this as something that should happen. It's wrong. Very wrong. And I'm glad it stands corrected. Today, it's seen very differently. A smart father looks at the fact that, hey, what if my daughter faces a situation later in life where she's dependent on somebody financially, and say the marriage goes bust, or there is some serious other occurrence whereby she is rendered a single parent, right? Or even a single person. How would she take care of herself? Today, I think it becomes therefore more important to empower your girl child, right? That is one aspect. That, I think, will probably continue the matrix in the way it began, which is girl students doing really well, but continuing to climb, right? Through college, through later education, through post-graduation, and then in careers and jobs, right? Now, this is, I think, better seen in a more advanced society. Perhaps Gloria would know that best in like the United States or in Europe. But in India, it's a completely different structure because the family takes over. The family structure has a certain amount of certain conditioning, a certain sort of notion with respect to these things. So I think that needs correction. So when we look at women's empowerment from an India perspective, I would say that it's women's empowerment not by itself. You're looking at social change, you're looking at economic advancement, you're looking at, this is especially below the line, you're looking at skill enhancement, which Srinivasaji spoke about. You're looking at several things that eventually tie into women's empowerment. Women's empowerment by itself is not about a company deciding, hey, we'll take equal number of men and women, right? Or an educational institution like ours saying, we'll take an equal number of men and women. It's not that. It's about how many come out there and want to offer their services towards, a certain skill or towards a job or towards a career. The first, I think, fallout happens at the family level itself, right? And not because an employer chose otherwise. So I think in India, it's a very complex thing, especially below the line. You're looking at 4 or 5 different complexities and dynamics that need to be, it's about change of mindset. It's about, that larger social change. It's about making sure that economically, they are at that level where they can say, I can run a family, provided I go out and earn well and I have a better future for my children. And then, what kind of skill do you ensure that it's not about doing those menial jobs? It's about, having an intelligent person having equal opportunity as, say, one that went to a better institution or a better school or a better college, right? It's about dreaming about being, say, in the best blue chip corporate, and why not? So it's very complex there, and I think that's what is in some ways that the government addresses through, a better quota system or a reservation system, or stressing on, when there is the Skill Development Council that's set up to say that we will give greater preference to women in certain skills so that, we truly start empowering them. So empowering is in India is for women, is a very, below the line especially. Above the line I would say we have come a long way, and it's almost there, I think a girl child who grows up in a middle class household, which doesn't have social restrictions or social conditioning, has equal opportunity already. And she goes out there and she proves, she joins the top 5, blue chips, or she gets into the top 5 consulting firms, she gets into the best institutes, she does brilliantly in her career. So I think we need to separate these two.
Well, yes. Gloria, you want to add something on that?
Just a couple of thoughts, and I couldn't agree with the points that you've made more, and it really is about a cultural shift, and I just am so happy to say, certainly in my career, that I've seen that shift happen, and again, it all depends on where you sit and the privileges that we all have, but the young men that I supervise now are as involved in their child care responsibilities. They will take leave and the expectation is, and their wives are working as well, that they will take leave to take care of their child when that child is ill. And it's not always going to be the wife or the mother who's the one that automatically takes time off to take care of that child. So that's a pretty significant cultural shift. And that wouldn't have happened, honestly. When I first joined the Foreign Service, it was always, well, if you're the mother and you're working, then you're the one that takes time off and your career might suffer, or you might not, your boss might not be able to expect you to complete that assignment, and so may give that assignment to somebody else that would have been career enhancing. So that's been a real career shift. But I also have to say, when we're talking kind of about the mentality of young women and the sort of the opting out, part of it, I have to say, is about that special mentor, that someone who sees that possibility in you and says, hey, why didn't you go for that job? You're qualified. Often, for whatever reason, young women generally don't put themselves out there or don't think that they can do that. They will often apply for the jobs they know they can do and not for the aspirational jobs. And there's a clear, and the research shows this, there's a clear difference in how men and women generally pursue jobs. And so that's a mindset and a cultural change. And then the third point I would just note is just creating the conditions that allow women to succeed. And in the United States, we have a lot of women who are the heads of single households. They don't always have the broad family support that you all have here in India. That's just been the nature, or families are far away. Americans move a lot, they follow their jobs, and so they may be very far away from that mother and grandparents and not have that structure to rely on. So part of it depends on, what is the employer doing, what is the state doing, what is the government doing to provide the support, whether it's in child care, whether it's maternity and paternity leave, whether it's other support that allows women to still be the head of their household, to still be, to care for their children and take on, and not just children, it's elder care as well, family care, that allow them to do that and still succeed and pursue, career opportunities.
Well, that's perfect. In fact, there is a saying, when you educate a girl, you educate a woman. When you educate a boy, you educate a man. When you educate a girl, you educate a family. I think the actual intent of that quotation was something else. And it's high time that women come out of that guilt factor of ensuring not to be, feeling much guilty to, you need to take it a little bit relaxed. That's okay not to be available every time. So I'm telling this to myself because I'm not at home for 5 days, so my kid's back. So it's okay to let go because sometimes you really have to do something which drives you to take that energy forward. And we've started having questions from the audience. So I'm just taking this with Mr. Srinivas Prabhu. So there is a question, we don't have a name. So the question is just creating policies, and there are much bigger policies and laws which are coming in.
Just give me, I'm not-
There are a lot of policies which we are creating, and there are a lot of laws which we are creating for women. But still the crime against women is not that, controlled. So where is the lacunae? We have the law, and is still the society not ready to take women on the same foot? Is it that the reason that the crime is not being controlled? In fact, the crime rate has gone higher, and the intensity of crime has also gone worse. So then where are we bridging the policy and the reality?
Yes, you are absolutely right. We do have strict laws to control crimes against women. In fact, 4 or 5 years back, the laws were amended to make it more stricter. But the question is, the time taken to dispose of a case, it takes much longer, much longer. Every time there's an adjournment, and it keeps on getting adjourned, the case getting adjourned. By the time the case is disposed, the victim does not get justice. She is mentally shattered, physically, mentally, financially, economically, everything shattered on all counts. So what I feel is, the law is definitely stricter. In fact, it could be made more stricter, but the implementation is needed. Much stricter implementation is needed. And there should be a law that the cases should be disposed of in a specific time. Right now, there is no law to control the adjournments. Every time the case is adjourned to a later date, much later date, but that should be controlled first. When he said there's a provision that cases can be disposed of in a fixed period, I think this can be controlled to some extent.
Okay.
Some extent.
And are we socially
And
open?
this, moreover, the law, the punishment should be made more stricter. And it should be, some cases it should be instant, then only this can be controlled. The law should create a fear that no one should think of committing a crime. That's what I feel.
The punishment should be more stronger.
The time should be, there should be a time limit with which the cases should be disposed of.
I get that.
Now there's no time limit. The case goes on.
So
years
probably that's
together.
giving the relaxation for the crime doer because he feels that the case is going to run all through his life so he can seep through.
Yes.
So probably if we have a limited time frame for the cases to be dispersed of, then
Definitely.
it gives him a little fear to act upon it.
But I went 2-3 months back, I read a news item in Rajasthan. A case of rape was decided in just 1 week.
Yes.
So that should be the spirit. If this happens, I think definitely the crime will go down.
True, but the case differs from case to case,
Yes.
Srinivasan, sir, you know that very well. The point here is it's about right to be heard, because you cannot just rush on the name of giving quick justice. So you have to give equal opportunity to all of them to be heard. And yes, probably our judiciary system has to expand its wings a little larger, having more number of benches available for dispersing of the cases faster, because that's one thing that we've always been talking about, that we have to disperse the pending cases
Within
at the
time limit.
earliest.
There should be a time limit.
Yes, I get that. Thank you for that. And Mr. Chaudhary, there's a question for you. So you are, again, you had been a counselor, training women, and you are again talking about women empowerment here. We're glad to have you here with us. So what would you, how would you direct the children who are at the age of, say, 14 to 21, because that's the most crucial age for be it a boy or a girl, to decide how the rest of the life is going to be. The right orientation is what is important. So what would be your advice for the boys and the girls of the age of 14 to 21 in how we have to get equity and gender equality?
So I think in a advanced sort of social, at a certain level, which is what I think Gloria and I have been talking about on and off, I think it's already there, right? Where there are the example that Gloria gave us, and I have examples. I have a friend of mine who put it out on Instagram. He was actually a person who came in as a trainee into my small consulting enterprise. Later on, went on to set up his own enterprise. He takes a holiday once or twice a year with his daughter alone, right? And he says, I have to do this because it means that my wife, my spouse, can pursue her career without any difficulty, without any guilt, that she doesn't have to accompany us every time, we take the children out. And right now he has one little daughter who's about, say, 3 years old, 2 years old. He said the strange thing was that at every airport, he went on this long trip, and he said at every airport there are several women who came up to him and said, can we, help you with the child, right? And they sort of moved forward and said, and they saw him, maybe struggling a little bit, trying to get the milk bottle out or, get some food or, get something organized. And it was a solo trip. So he said, no, I have my wife back home and I'm doing this with a purpose and I have to do this. So I don't need your help, right? So I think it's out there already. And, but in a certain section of society, which is, the word I think we've been using is, many of us are blessed. We are, privileged. And in that community, I think there is an awareness, there is an equal amount of respect, and I think that's a wonderful thing. So if anything, we have to just reiterate the fact that, respect your fellow being as an equal partner, right? And, or just an equal other member, and not be at all oriented by male or female, in terms of choice of a friend or choice of, a person who you sit and do your project with or a person that you travel with. And I think gender shouldn't come into it at all. And I think some of that, and I see that in, with my children as well, and I've seen them actually
I'm sorry,
transcend
I'm
it.
just interfering on here.
Yeah.
Is it also a parental issue here that the parents also don't raise their kids on the equal platform?
Very much, very much. So it's not just on the institution. I think a lot, in India especially, a greater conditioning comes from within the family because we are, heavily family structure driven, right? So the educator has some say, and I think what is learned at home can be further reiterated, right? But it begins at home, and it's extremely important that the parents live it by example. Is, the husband truly respecting the wife's decisions or giving her an equal say in all matters and not cutting her off and saying, hey, these are the things I decide. That's it, it's done. And she says, why didn't you consult? It's not necessary, So I think it starts with little things like that. So do you live by example? And do you teach your children that? And more than what the children hear in school or hear otherwise, they look and they experience, right? And they see what's going on at home and in their friends' homes, and they learn from that a lot more than they would out of a textbook or of something written on the board or a lesson, right? So in India, I would say the family structure plays, a very, very significant role. But then again, the more privileged, the more, educated, it's already happening, and the children are on par with each other. Parents are giving the daughter equal opportunity. But below the line in India, in the smaller towns, the smaller villages, it's a completely different story, or even economically. So one is the geographical division, the other would be the economic divide. And that sector, I think, still carries a lot of the I would say, old bad habits of, perhaps differentiating. So I think that needs to change. I really don't know if I answered your question pinpoint. I went all over the place.
Yes. But somewhere we could understand what are you coming to. And so I have a final question for this panel discussion to Ms. Gloria. First of all, Gloria, we are very proud for the position you're holding as a woman because it is so much to learn. I would just want to know one of your decisions which you had taken where you had to face the challenge of being a woman in a leadership role, and you took it to the right way and delivered the right thing. So just give us one of your such experience where you had difficulty because you were a woman, but you overcame that.
That's it. That's a really interesting question, because I have to say I've not been conscious of a particular difficulty because I'm a woman, but it gets back again to perhaps my own self-doubts or own sort of hesitation to exercise the authority of my position or of my training to do what I need to do. And, and I have to say, it gets back to an earlier point that I made, sort of reaching for those positions that are challenging and then fully inhabiting those positions is what really, proves the mettle, I think. And in my previous posting before coming to India, I was the chargé d'affaires in Costa Rica. And those are one of those opportunities that you don't know is going to happen until it comes to you, because we didn't have an ambassador, and so I was the number 2, and so I became the number 1. And then by default, you're it. And, a whole team is looking to you to make decisions, and, they expect you to lead. And, the host government expects you to show up and be an interlocutor and represent your government and do the necessary. And so there's sort of a poetic, in a way, and it gets back kind of full circular by putting myself into that situation, maybe not fully appreciating what it would mean until I was actually in the role. Then you step up and you realize, yes, I can do this job, and hopefully do it pretty darn well. And the team respects and joins together, and it turned out well. At least I didn't make too much of a mess of it. But it's one of those things that until you actually put yourself in the role, you don't really know, and then it's like, yeah, I'm prepared. I can do this. So, for what that's worth.
Thank you so much. We really had a wonderful conversation, and to take back, I think, first of all, talking about women empowerment, our wonderful panelists have made it very simple, make women empowerment simple, and started from within, and things will follow. Thank you so much for your time. And can I request Mr. Prime Point Srinivasan to please deliver a token of appreciation to all our speakers. Yes, this is the chairman and the founder of Prime Point Foundation, Mr. K. Srinivasan, felicitating Ms. Gloria for being with us today. And so, to Srinivas Prabhu, sir, who is the former Joint Director, Parliament, Lok Sabha. And for very insightful thoughts from Mr. Rajiv Chaudhary for being with us today. So we will surely take the crux of the conversation and see how can we reach it to be heard in the Parliament And thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful having a conversation with you all. Thank you so much.